Hello, everyone, and welcome back to KojiCon 2024, Presence, Place, Possibility. My name is Eric Dawson, and I'm an educator and farmer here for the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. We're a small nonprofit based in southeastern Connecticut on the property of Stone Acres Farms, and our mission is to connect people to each other and to where their food comes from through culinary and farm-based education. So KojiCon 2024 would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Our cultivator sponsor this year is Hako Lab, and we have and our session sponsor for today is Chelsea Green Publishing. So for today's presentation is titled Koji Inspiration from Recent Travels, Taiwan, Peru, and Korea. So we're going to journey around the world with Sandor Katz as he shares insights from his recent travels. So Sandor Elix Katz is a fermentation revivalist. He's the author of 5 books: Wild Fermentation, The Art of Fermentation, The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved, Fermentation as Metaphor, and his latest, Fermentation Journeys. Sandor's books, along with the hundreds of fermentation workshops he has taught around the world, have helped to catalyze a broad revival of the fermentation arts. A self-taught experimentalist who lives in rural Tennessee, Sandor is a recipient of a James Beard Award. With that, it is an honor to welcome Sandor Katz to our stream.
All right. Oh, were you going to say anything else?
Oh, I was going to say welcome.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Thanks, Eric. Thanks those of you who are out there in real time and who might be watching the videos later on. I'm Sandor Katz. I call myself a fermentation revivalist. I've been making Koji for about 20 years. I think at the time that I first published Wild Fermentation in 2003, I just had started making Koji. I didn't write about making Koji in that book, although I had been making miso for 10 years by then, since 1993. And in the early years, I was buying my Koji. I mean, at first, I didn't necessarily perceive it as something that I could make myself. And I was able to source it in the early years from South River Miso Company and also Miso Master in North Carolina. And then it just got more and more expensive. And I just decided I should bite the bullet and figure out how to control the temperature, and created an incubator. And I've been making Koji ever since then. And, in the early years, I was mostly making miso in a fairly straightforward way using beans. My Koji making has definitely been an evolution, and I've been inspired by a lot of the experimentation that I've seen. And I'm just gonna show off an experiment that I did this summer that I loved, and that is a tomato miso. And basically I cooked down tomatoes with some onions and garlic, into a slightly concentrated sauce, and then I cooled that off and mixed it with Koji and salt, and fermented it for 6 weeks, something like that. And this is just so good. Think tomato sauce with Parmesan already mixed into it. I mean, it's got sort of cheesiness, funkiness from the Koji aging. This past fall, I actually made a Three Sisters miso that I haven't tried yet. It's still in the cellar fermenting, but I used squash and beans and that I had grown in my garden, along with Koji from corn that I grew in my garden. So I'm very excited about that. But anyway, the topic of my talk is about my recent travels. And I actually got home from Korea 2 days ago. I'm still a little bit discombobulated and confused. I really have done more international traveling this winter, that I've ever done in rapid succession. And I traveled in Taiwan. I know that you've met many of the people who I met in Taiwan over the course of Koji Con. So I spent a few weeks in Taiwan, November into December. And then I was teaching in Peru in January. And then I just was in Korea during this past month, February. And I learned a lot about Koji in all of those places. So what I want to do is, I first want to. So Koji is a Japanese word. And a Japanese concept, and I think sometimes we use it as if it's interchangeable with the sort of other analogous traditions, and I don't really think that we can do that. The traditions are really quite distinct, so I actually have a little show and tell item. The Korean traditions are really, really different, and so are the Taiwanese one. But I'm fresh from Korea. So this is Meiju. This is probably weighs 3 or 4 kilograms, maybe even more than that. It's heavy. It's the size of my head, and this is this is a single block. This is just made of soybeans. There's nothing else in here. It's just soybeans soaked, boiled till they're soft, pressed into a block, dried, generally in contact with rice straw, partially dried. Like, the center of this, is still, as the maker of it described, like cheese. It's still, kind of soft and spreadable. Certainly in the Korean tradition, there's no tradition of adding a starter. This just grows spontaneously, helped along by the organisms that are present on the rice straw. And, everybody in Korea really talks about, or everybody who's making Meiju in Korea talks about the rice straw being critical to this process. So, it's in contact with the rice straw, then it's sort of tied up into a little support with rice straw, and then hung, and then it sort of develops, just sort of, hanging, outside at ambient temperatures. This was actually made in a greenhouse, but, the time that Meiju is made is after the soybean harvest in the fall. So generally it would be like November, December. This is made, and then the place where this was made, they were aging it for 3 months. So, they were just using the Meiju when I was there a week or a week and a half ago. The other thing that I learned for the first time about how Korean cuisine is using this is that, in my education, via descriptions of the Japanese styles, you make miso, you're making miso, you make shoyu, you're making shoyu. They're really distinct processes. They both involve making koji, but you would make a different koji for each one, and they're completely distinct processes. In the Korean tradition, there are several different things that can be made from Meiju, but the most basic, the most famous one, or the one that I've known about the longest, and that's most widely available in the United States, is gochujang. But the real kind of primary products from this are doenjang and kanjang. And basically what they're doing, and I'll show you some photos of this shortly, is they're filling up their ongi, their vessel, with blocks of the meiju, and then they're covering it with a strong brine. At the place where we were witnessing this, they were mixing roughly a 10% brine, although the way they were testing it was they were floating an egg in it. Which is roughly a 10% brine. So they were mixing a 10% brine. They were covering the meiju until the point where it was floating in it. And then they were aging it for a couple of months like that. And then they're straining it out. And the liquids age further as the ganjang. And then the solids age further as the doenjang. So it's just it's different. It's its own process. I know that in various literature, various people who I've talked to, when we start getting into the question of, okay, how would you make koji without a pure culture starter? Because I've generally made koji with a starter. I have no problem with using a starter, but just in general, in conceptually thinking about fermentation, I'm always thinking about okay, well, before there were pure culture starters at the very end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, how were people making these things? I've learned to be cautious talking about, wild fermentations of koji, because there is so much concern about mycotoxins. Certainly, other strains of Aspergillus and other, fungi that could potentially be growing on, soybeans that don't have an inoculation of a high concentration of specific Aspergillus oryzae spores. There is the potential for mycotoxins. There certainly is some documentation of mycotoxins forming in these. I certainly don't have the ultimate word about this. I mean, even in Korea, I heard a lot of debate about it, and some people who really stay away from the old school traditional things and prefer to do the more industrially processed ones that are made using starter cultures. But there's also a lot of people who are really devoted to the traditional ones. And, the traditional ones that I was eating there, the traditional ones that I brought home that I've been cooking with since, they're delicious. They're different. They have a lot of, distinctive character. And so, I have been pondering this question of mycotoxins, and I definitely don't have the ultimate answer. But I think that I just last night I pulled out, this is Keith Steinkraus's Handbook of Indigenous Fermented Foods. This was published in the 90s. He was a food scientist at Cornell University. He's passed away now, but this book is really just an incredible compendium of information about fermentation. And he's not the author of the whole thing. He edited it, and there's papers by different scholars who had expertise in different areas. But in the discussion of mycotoxins during fermentation, they were doing all these experiments. And so, mind you, this is published in the 90s, and this is referencing studies that were done in the 80s. But, basically what they were doing is taking blocks of meiju, and they were inoculating them with known strains of fungus, with strains of fungus known to produce mycotoxins, and then seeing what happened during the process. And the most interesting thing to me is that after growing the meiju and then putting it in a brine and fermenting those things, after a month of ripening of the fermented meiju, 2 to 69% of one known toxin, 31 to 84% of another was degraded. More aflatoxins were degraded after a subsequent ripening process. Thus, after 3 months of ripening in brine, 83 to 98% and 98 to 100%, respectively, were degraded in the mixtures. That was the mixed culture, as compared to 63 and 98 degraded in the natural fermentation that was inoculated with just the known aflatoxin. More reduction was observed when charcoal was added to the mixture. So, I mean, to me, the take home from this is that, sort of even in a biodiverse situation where there could potentially be some fungi that are producing mycotoxins, the further fermentation will degrade most of them. So anyway, I'm enjoying my jars of meiju that I brought home. I'm not worrying about it too much. I've done some experiments with wild fermented koji. I'll in my slideshow I'm about to give you, I'll show you a young woman we met in Taiwan who's sort of learning old methods from elders and doing them with wild fermentation. So, I'm reluctant to encourage too much experimentation because I just don't know enough. But clearly it can be done, it's just one of the ways that people make these things. So, Eric, maybe we could start with my slides. Okay, we're starting in Taiwan. Go ahead, go to the next one. Okay, so this is Ozzy. Some of you might have seen Ozzy from Yu Ding Xing, and that's him in his koji room making koji in these big baskets. Now, if you show us the next one, we'll see a close-up of that. Okay, the biggest surprise for me in seeing how people like Ozzy were making soy sauce in Taiwan is that they were fermenting the koji, the chu, for about a week, and they were letting it fully sporulate. And that's, sort of different than the idea that I got from reading books about, how to make shoyu in the Japanese tradition. Now, if we could see the next one, this is another soy sauce maker. This is Brian from Royal Jade. And if you give us the next slide, you can see a close-up of his boxes that he's making to use to make his chu. Again, he's leaving them for about a week, letting them fully sporulate, turn green. So I thought that was just, interesting and different. And it hasn't been warm enough for me to make koji yet since then. But as the temperatures warm up, I'm really looking forward to making some koji and making some soy koji and letting it go a lot longer and fully sporulate and turn green like that. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so the woman in the looking with a quizzical look next to Mara, looking at Pao, is Akun. And Akun is this young woman who lives in a rural area in Yilan County and in Taiwan. And she's been spending time with elders and trying to learn old methods of making koji. And what was really interesting to me is that she was making it without a starter at all. And, for her first batch, she was using leaves of a tree. If you give us the next slide. This is Huangjing Vitex Negundo Chinese chaste tree. And that's what she used as her initial starter for making soybean chu in her baskets. But then what she said is that, since the first batch, the baskets, have sort of become inoculated themselves. So as long as she keeps doing it in the same baskets, the koji is growing very reliably without any additional culturing. Okay, maybe next slide. Okay. Here are some things that she's doing with them, and particularly with the soybean chew. Taiwan had a very distinctive style of furu, fermented tofu. Where they basically made layers of the soy chew and sugar, and then pieces of tofu, then more soy chew and sugar, then pieces of tofu, then more soy chew and sugar, and layered those, and then poured over the top very low alcohol spirits. So miju, rice spirits, but just about 20% alcohol. So they poured those over the top. This is a jar that I made when I got home. It's still aging. I haven't sampled it yet. People were doing the same kind of process with other things besides tofu. So if you go to the next slide, Eric. Okay, this is with pineapple. This is a kind of jang that people were making with exactly the same ingredients, except using pineapple instead of the tofu. And then if you give us the next slide, this is the same thing with winter melon, which is a kind of edible squash that people there are eating. And again, this is like a jang fermented with soybean chew. Okay, let's see the next one, Eric. Okay, so this is a whole different conception of Koji-like fungus. This is hangchu, red rice koji. And you can see this is like at a facility where they're producing it. You can see it over the course of 5 days of development, how the color gradually intensifies as the fungus grows on the rice. And of course, in North America, you can buy supplements of hangchu everywhere, red rice koji, and people use it to lower cholesterol and maybe for other things as well. But it's a great vehicle for fermentation. And if you go to the next slide, this is a young Hakka woman who we met in Taiwan, was making a marinade that she uses for fish and meat and vegetables. But the base of it is basically freshly steamed sticky rice and hangchu. And we actually, watched her make this. And, after like 10 minutes, you can see that the color is the pigments from the red rice fungus are spreading into the rest of it. Okay, let's see the next one, Eric. Okay, another thing that I learned about that was like so hugely demystifying for me, and I think that maybe this woman Palma did a Koji Con presentation. I'm not certain, but she showed us how to make yeast balls using little Chinese yeast balls for years, but she showed me how to make them. So if you go to the next slide, so this is simply a dough made out of rice flour, and she was using an herbal decoction of like sort of 10 herbs that grow outside of her house in her village, and but she was very clear that the herbs were, for the flavor of the rice alcohol, and they really were not, critical to the fermentation. So, you could do the same thing using water or using an herbal infusion or decoction of herbs that you like or that grow near you. Like I wouldn't say that you need to sort of find all of these exotic herbs that come from a faraway place. If we could see the next one. Then we basically rolled out that dough into little balls. I mean, we were using a scale, 22 grams, just rolling them into a ball and placing them in a tray, as you can see. And then she took a dried rice ball from an earlier batch and she powdered it using a mortar and pestle. Next slide, please. And then we just sprinkled it on top. This is a little to-go box that we took with us, and so the ones that I have here in this jar, came from that box. And then Eric, if we can go to the next slide, okay. And then you can see this is after about 3 days. They're all furry. So these were made through backslopping, taking the previous batch, powdering that, sprinkling it on top, and then just keeping it warm, and then once the fungus was well developed, drying it out, which we did. We were driving around. It was in the dashboard of the vehicle that we were driving. And then once they're dried, they're very stable. And when I use these, I will make more of them also. Next slide, please. Okay, so then this is in a factory where they're making this sorghum liquor. This is in a giant factory, state-owned, TTL, Taiwan Tobacco and Liquor. And it was one of the biggest factory complexes that I've ever been in. Here you can see our whole Taiwan team. But these blocks were basically made from ground wheat mixed with water, pressed into these blocks, no starter at all, and then just cultured, but in these rooms that have been used, for this purpose. I mean, they said the factory started in 1950, so for 75 years, they've been doing the same thing in the same rooms at a mind-boggling scale. And that's the starter. And, this process is almost exactly the same as what we'll see when we get to the Korea slides in a moment, that I saw for making nuruk. But can we see the next slide? Okay, that's just another view without our pretty faces in the same room. And you can see that each one has a little hole in the center of it. Can we see the next one? Okay, now we're leaving Taiwan and we're going to Peru. And you might not think that, I'm going to find a lot of Koji in Peru, but I did. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is an ingredient that's very essential in Peruvian fermentation. This is hora, which means it's like corn malt. It's malted corn. You can see the little tails growing on the corn. And chicha de jora is a really, really important beverage there. And it's basically a fermentation of the hora into an alcoholic beverage that's really delicious, and it's culturally extremely important in the part of Peru where I spent time. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Koji of hora. So, Peru, on the Pacific coast of South America has just had a long history of migration from Japan and from China. And, and Peru has these, sort of cuisines that have developed. There's Nikkei cuisine, which is the Peruvian Japanese food, and there's also chufa, which is the Peruvian Chinese food. But anyway, Shizen, which is a Nikkei restaurant in Lima, at this fermentation festival we were both at, had made koji out of the hora. And it was just like as sweet could be. Because it's basically like you're doubling up methods of amylase production. So when you sprout grains, there's amylase production, and then when you grow koji, there's further amylase production. And then next slide, the team at Shizen was making a Hora Koji chicha that was just, it was just incredibly sweet, incredibly delicious. Maybe something in between amazake and the usual chicha de Hora. Okay, can we see the next one? Then this was very unexpected. This was at a restaurant called Alka in Ollantaytambo. I'm sure I'm massacring the name of that place, but at this restaurant, Stefania, who is an Italian fermentation enthusiast who I know was working at this restaurant Alka, and this is quinoa koji that they were serving as a burger, and it was just incredibly delicious. And normally I don't think of koji as the food. Koji is usually a starter for the next step of fermenting something else. But this just worked so beautifully as a way of serving and enjoying quinoa. Beautiful texture, really just alluring flavor. It was wonderful. Okay, now if we could get on to the next slide. Okay, now we're going to Korea. Next slide. Okay, so this is, at the same Meiju maker of the Meiju brick that I was just holding up, but, he had thousands of them there. And, it was really the peak season of, using them in the ferments. Next slide, please. This is how they were hanging. He basically had like a greenhouse structure. And so if he made the Meiju, let's say the end of November, beginning of December, it had been, only warmed by a plastic hoop house in a relatively cool environment over the course of the winter until now when they're using it. You can see how much growth there is on the surface. Part of their process before putting these blocks into the ongi to ferment into doenjang and ganjang was to scrub them with a brush, just give them a good wash to get rid of that kind of outer growth. But this is how they do it, sort of like tied up in rice straw. In the first couple of days while they're drying, it's in a room where the floor is covered with rice straw. And he specifically said that they turn it so that sort of each face has some time in contact with the bed of rice straw. And then once they're firm enough to handle, then they tie them up like this and hang them, still, in contact with rice straw, but also with air circulation in this hoop house structure. Next slide, please. And then filling them up with the pre-mixed brine. What I wanted to convey with this photo is that they were floating in there. They're not just like barely covering them. They were filling each ongi, maybe a little bit more than half, almost 2/3 of the way full with blocks of Meiju, and then filling the vessel up with brine so that the blocks were floating in the brine. Next one. Okay, and then it's all outdoors. They're aging them all outdoors. These lids that you can see with the sort of orange red rings around them, they're actually glass. with some air holes around the sides. So the general idea is that they want some sunlight in there, at least in the early stage of fermentation, while all the ingredients are together. They like for some light. And also some air circulation in later stages once they separate out the solids and the liquid into separate vessels and then age it further. Sometimes they'll put ceramic tops on that don't let light in. But in the early stage, everybody seems to want some light shining onto it on the sunny days. Okay, I see a question about what's in the locked up ongi. So this place, which was on Jeju Island, locked up in the center was what they call their mother kanjang, and that was like 129 years old. So, obviously like inherited down generations, and, with each batch of kanjang, they were putting a little bit of the mother soy sauce in, as a starter. I mean, it made me think of, when I make miso, I have my Koji process, but then I'm always putting in, what I call seed miso to, if I'm doing a long fermenting one, I always put that in. And so this is a way of really sort of like seeding it with something that's, really, really been going for a long time. Next. Okay. And then this is, this was tasting 3 different ages of doenjang, and just like with miso, as you age it longer, thanks to the Maillard reaction, it just gets increasingly dark, and it darkens in color, and the flavor changes. I mean, I wouldn't say it's simply about getting better. It gets different. It gets earthier, and also the texture of it changes. It gets drier. So it definitely evolves over time. And I want to bring to people's attention like a book. Well, actually, here we'll finish the slideshow because it's almost at the end, and then I want to bring to people's attention like a new book that actually like I was given in Korea, and it's coming out in the U.S. in 2 weeks or something like that. And then it's by Minggu Kong. It's called Jang, the Soul of Korean Cooking. He's talking about how in Buddhist monasteries, in sort of kitchens where people have like multiple batches of jang, they're using jangs from different generations, or from different years. We could think of it as from different vintages, for different things in the cooking. And so it's sort of like, it's not that all jang is the same. Each jang is a little bit different. And, a chef who, tunes into the subtle differences between the batches can actually make use of different jangs in different ways. Okay, let's just go back and finish the slideshow. Okay, so give us the next one. Okay, so now this is in Han's fermentation lab where they're making nuruk. And nuruk is another one of these things that's, it's widely commercially available. I've gotten it in a little like powdered form. It says enzyme amylase. It doesn't give much information about how it's made, but it's made just like the chew at the Kaoling factory. So typically it's made from wheat. Mr. Han said that traditionally it's made of barley, but he's making it out of different things and out of mixes of things. So he's using wheat, barley, sometimes rice, sometimes mung beans, sometimes a mix of those things. He feels like each of them has like each substrate for making nuruk results in a different kind of balance of enzymes, and he's also making different kinds of rice alcohol with it, and he likes to do it in different ways. But this is the room where the nuruk is being aged. It's basically you're taking raw wheat or whatever the substrate or combination of substrates is. You're grinding them up dry, mixing them with water, pressing them, into these little discs. These discs are thinner than at the Gowling factory. I'm sorry, thinner. He's aging them for, I think, about 45 days. And then the next slide is like another view, though. Here's a close-up view. Yeah, you can see, you can see some fungal activity on the exterior. And then if you go to the next slide, this is just opening one up and looking at the, sort of penetration of the fungus on the interior. And I think that's the end. Is there one more? No, I guess that's the end. Okay, great.
Yep,
so put me back on the screen and let's see. So that's all. It's a lot of food for thought. None of it is exactly Koji, really, except for what I saw in Peru. Peru's the only place where they're really doing classic Koji. Japan and Taiwan each have their own distinctive methods. And in Taiwan, some people sort of slip back and forth talking about Koji and Chu. In Korea, nobody's talking about Koji. And a lot of people there, have the idea that what they're doing is just a completely different thing from Koji. There's also a lot of sensitivity in both of these places about the fact that they were colonized by by Japan at a time when the Japanese Empire was quite expansionist, and they both are trying to really cherish what is sort of specific and distinctive about their cultures. But the flavor of the things that result from the fermentation with the meiju are just really different from the flavor of the things that ferment with Koji. So they're not the same thing. There's some the doenjang compared to miso has there's more going on. I'm not going to say it's more delicious, but it's just it's more complicated. It's more complex. The flavors that are going on, and I think that that's a reflection of the biodiversity of the of the meiju, and and these jangs, gochujang, ganjang, and doenjang are really like at the core of of the whole cuisine. It's so funny because my Westerner's perspective was that kimchi was at the core of Korean cuisine, and I mean kimchi is ever present in Korean cuisine, but kimchi is always like a side dish. what's at the core of the main dishes are these are these jongs. And anyone who's interested in learning more about these about these Korean jongs and learning how to use them, I mean, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's so funny because I had pre-ordered a copy, but it's not coming out in the U.S. until, I don't know, 2 weeks from now. And then just randomly, I don't know how random it was, but I met this chef, Minggu Kong, who has written this book, and he gave me a copy of this, and it's really. Last night I became engrossed in it, and I haven't read the whole thing, but it seems like a really great book. So I wonder if anyone has any questions. I haven't really been reading the. So okay, the question at the end that I see is it only in Japan where we find traditional single fungus fermentation? And yeah, basically, Japan really embraced microbiology, very early. And, I mean, when I visited Japan, which I've only done once, I did, I visited a Koji brewery, Terada Honke, that actually is not using Koji starter. They are, growing their own Koji starter and reusing their own, and they have a whole methodology they use. They add a little bit of ash from a specific tree that grows outside of their brewery, and they add that to rice, and they do it in the warm weather of summertime, and they're doing it in the rafters of this of the building that's been housing the sake brewery for 500 years. So they're doing a kind of wild fermentation, but they definitely have like parameters around it, and they're doing it in this ancient building because Japan is a place where there's been a huge amount of of cultural continuity. But in a way, cultural continuity is a luxury. And from a lot of people in Taiwan and from a lot of people in Korea, we heard about political factors, often involving Japan, that have caused a lack of cultural continuity. And so people are trying to sort of figure out old ways, and and doing it really very effectively. So I see a couple of questions. How does adding ash affect a wild fermentation? And I see Sean Hanna really like put the nail on put the nail on the head, hit the nail on the head. It's a pH thing, I mean, by ash is alkaline, and by increasing the pH, it's just a way of narrowing the range of what can grow, and it seems to encourage the Aspergillus fungus that we want. Can you elaborate on that fermented tofu? Is there rice koji in it? So, okay, if you look at in my I'm pretty sure in an Instagram post, I sort of elaborated the recipe that we learned for this tofu roux, but there's no rice in it. This is just soy koji, sugar, and then like roughly 20% rice alcohol. And tofu. That I guess I had salted the tofu a little bit and pressed it for a couple of hours before I added it to these other ingredients. So there's a little bit of salt in it, but that's the basic process. Okay, and okay, Pao put a recipe for the tofu roux.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, Sandor, there are so many questions coming through. Yeah, would you want to go back to some of the ones at the start? Some of the ones from
Yeah,
the start
sure.
of the conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet. Um, let's see. So where was one was from Melissa? Sorry, give me 1 second. That was basically here it is. Have you seen any microbial analyses of the Meiju and the Gunjong?
Yeah, sure. I mean, while I was in Korea, I started reading about it, but sure. I mean, there's been a lot of research by, Korean microbiologists. Sure. I mean, so I can't recite that literature, but if you want to go looking for it, there's certainly like a good amount of research that's been done.
Gotcha, sweet. And then you mentioned like the influence of Japanese ferments on like places in South America. So wondering if you just like talk a little bit more, talk a little bit more about those sort of like influences.
Well, sure. I mean, there's I think that there's a long history of migration from East Asia to Peru. A former president of Peru was a Japanese Peruvian. There's these cuisines like all around these sort of Nikkei restaurants. That's the Japanese Peruvian cuisine. There's the chufa, which is the Chinese Peruvian cuisine. I mean, that's those people from Shenzhen were the only people who I met who were sort of applying Koji techniques to distinctively Peruvian ingredients, but that doesn't mean that they're the only people who are doing it. It just means that they're the only people who, who I met and who showed them to me. But I know that there is like this long history of sort of influence of Japanese as well as Chinese cuisines in Peru, and it gives Peruvian cuisine a lot of really distinctive twists, and the food in Peru is amazing, and I think that as sort of the spirit of Koji Con and chefs around the world are getting more experimental with Koji. That includes some of the Japanese and Japanese inspired chefs who are down there.
Gotcha, sweet. And then, this is an interesting question. So when you were spending time in those inoculation rooms, do you have like any reaction or like what did it smell like in there?
I mean, not. I mean, I certainly did not have any like reaction. I didn't like, start sneezing or, I didn't have any like physiological reaction at all. I mean, sure, the rooms all had like aromas, but, not, I mean, surprisingly mild, honestly, like for being in a room full of growing fungus. I mean, so one thing with what I saw of the Nuruk production, where I didn't go into the rooms, but we were looking at them through windows. But in Taiwan at the Kaolin factory, they just let us right into the room. We were like kids in a candy shop. It was very exciting. But those are all of raw substrates. If you had asked me before these experiences, I would have told you that, to grow Koji on any substrate, it has to be cooked. Because, in the Japanese Koji tradition, as far as I know, the substrate that you're growing the fungus on is always cooked. But, in both of those cases, they're growing the fungus on raw substrates, and it still grows. I think it grows much more slowly.
Mhm.
I think that in the cowling factory, it was like it was like a month. In the Nuruk laboratory, it was 45 days. Um, but I mean, he was saying that the issue with temperature is mostly they have to make sure it doesn't overheat. So, they're not artificially heating the room to keep it warm. It's more that they're ventilating the room to make sure that the heat generated by the fermentation, once it really gets going, doesn't accumulate in the room and overheat the whole thing. So, the dynamics of fermenting something raw are a little bit different than the dynamics of fermenting a cooked substrate where the nutrients are much more available. And this is why it takes so much longer.
Gotcha. And then I just saw this comment from Mara pop up. I think yeah, touches pretty well to what you were saying. Does make more sense for wild fermentation for a raw substrate. Because yeah, I guess the microbes are haven't been like killed off in the cooking process. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, but I mean, here I'm gonna hold up this big Meiju block again. I mean, this is definitely a cooked substrate, and when we asked about how well do you cook it, he's like, oh yeah, you want to just be able to like crush it without much force between your fingers. So, he was talking about cooking the soybeans for 7 hours. Before pressing them into this. So, this is not made from a raw substrate, but yeah, Maura, I would definitely agree that, a raw substrate, a raw substrate would, have its own, biome to contribute. So you probably would have Aspergillus oryzae on the raw grains, along with whatever other things were on the raw grains. And I think that, maybe that's one of the things that could potentially contribute to some kind of mycotoxins. I don't know, although I didn't really hear anything about mycotoxins in relation to these alcohol starters. It was always in relation to this.
Gotcha. Interesting. And then I think you touched on it a little slightly, but so going back to like the comment about the ash, so like say you were to nixtamalize like corn or something, for example, would that have like a similar effect on the pH compared to like adding ash or something?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, when I've made koji on corn, I've always nixtamalized it first. Mostly, less for the increase of pH, and more just because I'm worried that like the fungus, might have a hard time penetrating the skin of the corn. And so, if you use nixtamalization to break down the skin and remove the skin, um, um, uh, the fungus will be able to grow more easily. You can see my light changed, and now from the skylight, it's shining right in my face. Okay.
Um, let's see. Yeah, let me. Oh, there's an. Let's see. Yeah, lots of like interesting like discussion and conversation happening in the comments right now. So I'm just trying to sift through to find some of the questions. Um,
Oh yeah, okay. I see that Mara is recounting like how hot it was in the chew room, at the cowling factory. Um, yeah, we got really sweaty in there. Um,
yeah, that's oh. Swoop, here we go. Yeah, let's see. Oh, this is. I saw this one earlier. When you were in Taiwan, did you see any ferments that like weren't like primarily using like black soybeans?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think like that, the photo that I showed you of the tofu roux. I think that was I think that was a chew made from yellow soybeans.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And I see some discussion of bacillus. So yeah, I mean, a spontaneous fermentation of cooked soybeans, you're always going to have bacillus in it. You know, Bacillus subtilis is what makes natto. I had a lot of interesting natto conversations in Korea because there's another jang that's not made in this way. I'm sure I'm going to butcher the word chonjukjang, but it's basically like a bacillus fermentation. It smells and it reminds me of natto. So I kept on referencing natto, and people felt like it was very much distinctive from natto, mostly because in contemporary Japanese natto production, there's always a starter, Bacillus subtilis var natto, in the Korean tradition, there's no starter, and some people tried to tell me that they feel like you can only make chanjukjang, in Korea. That it's something that it would be impossible to make anywhere else in the world. Personally, I was very skeptical about that idea because, my general understanding is that, Bacillus subtilis is found on not only all soybeans, but on all beans. And, I have made natto without a starter. And I've met people from different parts of the world where there are traditions of, sort of fermenting something like natto without a starter. I witnessed it in China. I witnessed it in Myanmar. I've met people from Thailand. I've met people from Nagaland who are doing that. And then, most interesting of all to me is that there's a, completely distinct tradition in West Africa of making all of these fermented bean condiments, not with soybeans, but with African locust beans and other beans, which have a very similar smell and flavor to, natto and chanjukjang. So I don't know. There's not, mostly in Korea, the chanjukjang seems to be cooked. Beautiful stew. Oh my God, such incredibly delicious, deep flavor. I love that. And some people seemed very wary of eating it raw, but then other people told me that they regularly eat it raw. So like with all questions of fermentation, there's no unanimity. People have very different perspectives on it. And different ideas. The person who was my host in Korea, it happens that like her parents are a PhD food scientist and a PhD pharmacist, and her family would never take homemade jangs from anybody because they were like too suspicious about it. Her parents coming from their food science and pharmacology backgrounds, but then we ate all these incredible artisan jangs and met other people who would never eat the mass-produced ones.
Wow, that's so cool. Sorry, while you were talking, I was watching through all of these comments come through. There's one comment here about like making a miso with huitlacoche corn. So I think that's the corn smut. Have you ever done anything like that?
I've never done that. I mean, I've never had enough huitlacoche, but I'm sure that would be delicious. Now I do see Firebelly Fungi wrote, oh, no, I'm sorry. No, it's Peter Barrett. I made natto recently by accident when my white bean koji overheated. And, I've had experiences like that with tempeh, with koji. And I mean, that's what really, that's where I realized that Bacillus subtilis is always there. I mean, it's such a such a common soil bacteria that it's on all of these substrates. And the thing is that unlike many of the bacteria that would be on your raw substrates, cooking it doesn't kill them. Because they have a strategy of, like, when they're stressed by heat, they create these spores that can survive boiling temperatures. If you pressure cook them, you probably could kill them, but if you just boil them, they won't die. And it's because of this, this resilience that, they're doing all of this experimentation, bringing Bacillus subtilis into space, because not only can it survive high temperatures, it can survive low temperatures, it can survive high radiation, it can survive high pressure. So it's just, an extremely resilient bacteria. And, Peter, I had exactly the same experience. And, this is, part of how I came to realize that it's always there and it always can survive boiling temperatures. And it's only, the fact that the Aspergillus cultures, when you're growing Koji, or the Rhizopus cultures when you're growing tempeh, inhibit the growth of Bacillus subtilis, but they don't kill it. They just prevent it from growing. And then if they should happen to die from overheating, then Bacillus subtilis is ready to assert itself.
Gotcha. Sweet. Wow. Yeah, all this conversation in the comments is fantastic. Yeah, lots of people are like, we're gonna like mushroom misos. That sounds really cool. Yeah, so I think, yeah, folks want to toss in any more questions for Sandor. Yeah, toss those in now, and then if you don't have any more, Sandor, I think.
So, I know that, Mara, in her, in her, work on Chu, has been sending samples of, different kinds of wild fermentation Chus that she has encountered or made, to a couple of different laboratories for testing. And, I let her know that I'm gonna take a couple of pieces of this Meiju block and send it to the labs that she's working with, so we can sort of get some some testing on this. But I think that just some of the fear that I've been hearing about the idea of making Koji without cultures. I mean, I think we just we have to figure out what the parameters are for doing it safely, because pure cultures, there's just ancient traditions of doing this without, before the pure culture starters existed. And I certainly encounter some people who have been experimenting in this vein, but everyone's trying to sort of like better understand what the parameters are for safety. But I think a big piece of it is just recognizing that this is not the food. You're not taking a bite out of this and eating this. Like you're going and further fermenting this, and the sort of it's the succession of processes and the sort of continued digestive processes of these sort of subsequent processes that's further breaking down whatever it is that's in there. It's getting further broken down by these further processes, and presumably that's part of what's making the food safer. So anyway, those are some reflections on a winter of crazy travels, and I thank you all for joining. I wish I had definitive answers, and what I can tell you is the more I learn about fermentation, the less I have definitive answers to anything, and the more I have just sort of respect for the the incredible like wisdom that ancestors in every part of the world figured out without the benefit of the science, and just questions about how we can sort of work with these incredible organisms, and sort of make use of these amazing traditions, but then sort of renew them in kind of interesting and unique ways. So I thank you, and thank you, Eric, for your hard work in making this all unfold so smoothly. And thank you to the people who have spent part of their Saturday with us.
Sandor, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing, and all the knowledge and wisdom that you have. Greatly appreciated it.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, I'm gonna remove you from the stream, and then we'll wrap up for the session. Wow. That was awesome, Sandor. Once again, thank you so much. So that wraps up this afternoon's session. So as always, if you want to learn more about what we're doing over here at Yellow Farmhouse, you can check out our website at yellowfarmhouse.org, as well as our Instagram account at yellowfarmct. Sorry, I forgot to mention, if you haven't already, you should definitely follow Sandor on Instagram at Sandor Kraut. So you can find that over here if you're not following him already. If you have any questions about the conference so far, just shoot us an email at info@yellowfarmhouse.org. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow KojiCon on Instagram at koji.con to keep up to date on everything that's happening. So we only have a few more presentations tonight. Yonghwa Jung is going to be joining us tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a presentation titled Embracing Place with Korean Alcohol. So be sure to tune into that one at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we only have 2 more presenter presentations after that. Marika Growing Kawaguchi is going to be presenting tomorrow morning, Sunday, at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then Takashi Sato will be closing out the conference at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow afternoon. And then our wrap up will happen from 3 to 4. So be sure to tune in to all of those presentations, and happy KojiCon, and I'll see y'all later tonight. Peace.